Our next speaker is Chester Woolley. And Chester has over 40 years experience in the venture capital, and he manages more than $4 billion in pioneering venture debt. He has led investments over 400 companies, played a key role in launching impact-driven funds like our Unitas Equity Fund, Elver Equity, and Palomar Capital. Currently, he is managing partner at Palomar Capital and chairman of University Impact Ventures. He serves on multiple boards in helping direct over $300 million in donor-advised funds towards philanthropy and impact investments. Please welcome Chester to the stage.
Right there. First of all, whoever put me after Becky, I would say that was a bad setup for that. And I would also say that getting to know Becky, and particularly getting to know Alan's organizations over a period of time, it is rare, very rare in my experience, that wealth managers, people of means, take the time to look at legacies. And I think Becky is a very good example of legacies, and I just really want to thank the opportunity that you guys have done, and certainly recognize it over a period of time, because I think that's something that should be looked at. I'm going to talk today a little bit about one of my favorite topics, because I think that most of us can relate to it, the middle class. So before we start, I would like to put this in your mind and then shout out your favorite shows when you grew up on television that featured the middle class. So I'm just going to say, for me, I Love Lucy was one of the great middle class. Now, so for the younger ones in the room, you don't probably remember that. And there was Leave It to Beaver. So anybody else with some modern names? What's that?
Full House.
Full House. See, that's way beyond. That's beyond my knowledge there. So, but it was the Brady Bunch. You know, classical middle class. And anybody else? I think the idea that I wanted to attract here is that we grew up as idolizing the middle class. I don't know that we actually knew that we did, but the middle class was the bread and butter of this country. I used to think it was actually a master plan from the Constitution that there would be a middle class. In reality, it came about for some other reasons. And the problem I think that I have identified, and once again going to our legacy, is the middle class seems to be shrinking. It doesn't just seem to be shrinking. I actually think, and I'm going to try to do this, is that we basically are essentially losing the middle class at this point. I don't want to be too negative about it, but I think there's very few people in this room and around the world that statistically hasn't seen that, either through the things you've read, the people you know, and the families. What your kids, and particularly I think what is disheartening to me, is the younger generation, many of them, are losing hope. No longer can they hope in their minds to have a new house or to buy a house. No longer do they actually think that if they go and get an education, they'll get paid more for that. All of that is a little bit of the foundations of this country. And I'm not saying that that's true for everybody, but all sorts of surveys have actually shown that. I mean, one of the basis, and this is a startling statistic that I found, is that 1% of Americans now own more than the next 60% of Americans. Someone corrected me on that and said, actually, we are within 5 years of 1% owning 99% of what the other country owns. In many cases, when I was a kid growing up, we used to call those banana republics, which is probably politically incorrect. So anybody that does that, please don't report me to the politically correct police, because that's a problem for me. But the idea being is that the statistics show that we are growing apart. And so some of the things I thought was interesting, because I wanted to kind of do that as we actually, as a younger people lose hope, is one, if you look at inflation, with inflation adjusted for the last 30 years, the average middle class person has a 3% increase in income, which is really kind of, I thought, well, that's not bad. At least we're not falling behind. The real problem is that if you go down, housing expenses in that same period have gone up 144%. So if it used to take, at least if I recall, our grandfather about 3 years' salaries to buy a home. In my generation, it took 4 years' salary to buy a home. In today's world, it's between 7 and 8 years' salary to buy a home. That is simply making us slowly lose hope. 8 years' salary is a lot to go on one of the aspects of your life over a period of time. You actually also see that, and once again, I don't mean to point fingers at anybody, but education costs are out of control comparatively to what our incomes are. And a lot of that is that we could borrow against it, you can have student loans, et cetera, but it's allowed our institutions to be 280% on adjusted inflation basis more than the average kids today. And thus, going to college is a real basis. When kids come and ask me, should I go to college and spend $100,000, $200,000 and go into debt, and can I get that back? My answer historically has always been yes. But you actually now have to start thinking about that. That's a pretty big hole to start in. And maybe there are some other alternatives to that. And then obviously food is 78% at the current time, as that were that. Essentially, the middle class are staying still and expenses are moving forward. Thus, we have this pressure. It's an incredible statistic that 1/3 of people who consider themselves middle class today cannot spend more than $460 on one expense and not go into debt. That essentially means nobody has savings. In fact, I was corrected by this figure the other day by a professor who said it's actually 70% of America cannot make a $400 payment for something and not have to go into debt. That basically is a definitive sign that the middle class. And once again, I think the most important thing is not that home buying, and I'm not promoting home buying as the basis, is it was always the hope of the middle class, and that is becoming to fade. If you actually just go out and ask people, they're having a hard time making rent. And now we're starting to talk about homes, per se. You know, if you look at this, rather than to be, you know, like the doom and gloom of some of this overall, what I love these things, and particularly, and I have, you know, many of my mentors, Bob Gase here, other people from Unitas, is that it was fun for us to sit down and say, what is the problems that face us, and rather to basically say, you know, this is depressing, you know, or elect somebody different or this or that, is there something we can do to basically take on that task? And one of the things I really like about what Gronko and Alan's group and Eric and everybody else has done is that this is a great forum to make your legacy about doing something hard. And I don't think it's going to be a 2-week basis, and it's not going to be probably a 2-year basis, but do you group together with existing organizations, new organizations, and say, let's approach some of these issues. Now, I've been doing, and Becky last time that we spoke together, I said I've done a lot of India and et cetera, but I've actually decided to come home a little bit, slowly, for those who actually are in my other projects. But the idea was, here is the middle class. It's under attack. You know, there's been approaches to it. I mean, in Europe, they basically, do, more taxation, so there's more equity to basis. That doesn't really fly well in the United States for most people. I realize that, but that's one alternative. Sometimes there's just coups and revolutions. That doesn't get the middle class together, but it actually ferments some of the basis. But I really want you to think that I'm not coming here with a panacea of solutions on how to restore the middle class, but really with the challenge that everybody here think of different ways to actually do it. The thing that I was impressed about personally as I looked at this, and somewhat politically in what is possible in today's world to restore the middle class, is to say, what about us saying that employees start buying the companies they're working for? Now, to my amazement, and I don't really know what happened in the 1970s. I guess I was alive, but I really wasn't paying attention. There was some really incredible legislation passed that actually our government was really inspired and said, we need to incentivize workers to become owners. Now, I'll step back to this to say, I'm a venture capitalist in the Silicon Valley, and maybe raise their hands. I should specify, when the word ESOP is used, what is the actual thing that most of you think in this room? Any responses?
An employee benefit.
An employee benefit.
Part of an employee package.
So if you work in Silicon Valley, you work in anywhere, you can say, yes, I get a salary, I get a bonus, but I also get part of an ESOP or a share in the company, and these are equity, and when a company goes public in 3 years, I'm going to be the wealthiest woman in the world, and et cetera. That is an ESOP, and particularly in technology, that's what we view. That's not what I'm talking about. It happens to be interrelated to this, but the laws that I find relatively inspiring are called employee ownership, the employer ownership laws that were instituted that basically say that employees can own a business. It's done in a very particular way. It has trustees, it has guardrails to say there's huge tax advantages to it, and we'd like to make it go forward. So today, if you look at ESOPs, when I say ESOPs, I'm talking companies that are owned by their employees. Right across the street, I noticed from the hotel is Publix. Publix is one of the best known ESOP-owned companies. It's owned by its employees. It's publicly traded, which is a little bit rare because most ESOP-owned companies are not publicly traded. Most of them are private. But it basically says that the employees actually benefit from whatever dividends, et cetera. If you look at employees from Publix, the average clerk that's been working there, let's say 10 years, probably will end up with about 7 times the retirement asset of other middle-class workers doing the same thing that they do, which is, one, amazing to the back end of this country, which is now aging, and now we know that. Their annual incomes are increased because of dividends. They don't just get a salary and a bonus. They get the profits from Publix actually filters down to the employees. And it's really not, it's not brain surgery. Most of them stay longer. They're loyal to their own companies, to the whole thing. They feel like they're part of it. And the employing companies basically have higher gross compared to other businesses because the employees are promoting it. You also have that they're more adaptable during economic downturns. I think this is probably the most compelling reason. If you look when an economic downturn happens, and you look at these arguments between unions and other bases to say, hey, we're down 20% in sales, we need some cuts, we need to trim our workforce, et cetera, the employees' own companies actually get together and figure out, yes, we have this problem. Do we cut everybody's salary to keep them all working, or do some of us leave, or do some of us go? But it actually tends to be a better solution, and not one with a bunch of strikes out in front. It's because the employees have actually come up with their own issues. And then you basically had just more motivated employees overall. And the last one is the higher retention. I'll give you an example. I've been looking at this for about 5 years, and luckily I've helped back some people that do ESOPs or provide the financing. And one of the ones that I really liked the very most was that we did one in San Diego with a lawn care service or a gardening service, right? And that gardening service had about 150 gardeners. And the owner wanted to sell the business, and make a long story short, the employees bought the business. And since that, you now have probably, and as you can imagine in San Diego, almost these people are all Hispanic and et cetera. But in the first 2 years, each year, that business has grown 30%. And I was amazed because service businesses like that don't grow 30%, usually, that are pretty mature and stable. But if you think about it, one of the things that I said, you know, this is actually worth my 3rd grade education, not my master's education, is that when you go look for a gardener, the average person stops somebody that they see working in a yard and says, "Who do you work for?" or "Can you work for me?" And historically, the gardener will probably say, if they happen to be self-employed, they'll probably be very eager and tell you who they are. If they happen to be working for a company, they'll say, "Yeah, the company's name is on the door of the truck. You go and figure it out." And in this company, what happened, they said, our best sales agents are our gardeners, because that's who people are stopping anyway. We don't need to get a bigger sales force. We need to train our gardeners and incentivize them that if they do it. So these gardeners now have little business cards in their pockets when they're out in the field. People stop, they say, "Oh yeah, you should do this, here's my cell number, and you should call me because I can sign you up." And of course that gardener gets a little bit of a profit for a new customer. The sales go up at the organization, and everybody benefits as a whole. To me, that is, once again, not brain science, or it's basically just saying that everybody's working in the right direction together. And that's what I like about that. And of course, most of those gardeners will end up having a retirement fund that's much higher than others. So if you want to be, and this is once again, you know, if you want to make employee ownership, is that there is about 33 million US businesses that are going to, or expected to be sold. There's 33 million businesses overall, and about 12 million of them in the next 10 to 15 years are expected to be sold. And that's really just more family businesses that the new generation doesn't want to take on. It's, you know, you have a business and you sell it, et cetera, et cetera. And we call that the silver tsunami, which is coming through. Now, a majority of these existing businesses would like to sell to their employees, but candidly, they don't really know how to do it, or they don't know how they get financing. I'll give you an example. We were just talking, and my partner, Brendan Richardson, is here because he knows more about this than I do. But he basically said that we were talking with a 401k company that manages 401ks. And this is a company that's been very successful. The owner wants to exit, and we actually spoke with them about doing an ESOP, and he said, "You know, it's amazing. I'm like an expert in 401ks. I had no idea the benefits of selling to your employee. And I'm a financial dude." And we actually then, what I've actually found is very few of us really know that there is a benefit to selling to your employees, and not only going forward. It's tax advantaged. And once again, I'm not going to do this because I know Alan and crew are the true accountants to this. The laws, and I'm not going to lie to you, are thick and confusing. But in most cases, you can sell your business if 70% of the employees at least, or a broad-based, what they call a broad-based employees buy it, for tax-free or tax-deferred. And when I say tax-deferred, it generally means in perpetuity. You know, essentially, as I kind of say it in my simple terms, and once again, the accountants can kill me, but it's, you can outlive your tax liability, which is essentially the best way to get rid of taxes in some ways over a period of time. Also, if you turn the business into an S corp after the employees purchase it, and by the way, you have to be a C corp to basically buy the business tax-free. Most ESOP trusts then convert themselves into an S corp, and all of the profits of that business are tax-free going forward, as long as 70% of the owners to do it. Now, when I said there was enlightening laws going on, I don't think in today's Congress we could get a law like that passed. I'm not, disparaging the political situation, but those are huge incentives to get people to moving. And I really think it's just, as it said, it's a very misunderstood concept in a business. And one of the biggest issues is the one that we started with, is that everybody thinks ESOP is a part of your compensation package when you're joining a high-tech firm, which is that's really not the case. So if you look at the impact investing, and because I've been with impact investing years, a lot of people don't seem to be able to relate to it. They're like, okay, it's great, there's people hurting, but how am I going to do that? Is that philanthropic? Is that whatever? It's pretty clear to me the middle class solutions do not rely in pure philanthropy. I think it basically involves investing with a perspective that is going to help the middle class. And really, I think that the biggest thing is that we need to give sellers of business, and one of the reasons I'm excited to be at this conference and others, is that many of you are going to sell your businesses in your lifetime. And before KKR or your friend down the street wants to buy the business from you, you should at least get somebody to sit down to you and say, if I sold my business to my employees, how would that work? The second thing is that you need to inform the employees that there are advantages to this, because a lot of employees have no idea if we don't know. And the third is that you really need to encourage the sellers. And we can come back to that in a second. Now, providing the finance is one of the big impediments, and that's something that is kind of something that we can get into the meat of how to help this going forward. Right now, most sellers of a business can use, and once again, I don't want to get really technical here, but when you create an ESOP, you create a trust. It's not necessarily a communist thing that all the employees are coming to be owners. The trust is formed by the company, and the employees become a member of the trust. It has a separate trustee to it to make sure that things are going, and then from there, the business is actually run efficiently. Now, employees are basically the advisors to that trust, and they basically use it as such. But that's basically really how this works over a period of time. Now, one of the ways that when you finance a business, more than 50% of current ESOPs, and there's been about 6,000 ESOPs in this country at this point, representing close to 18 million workers, is that the seller, the owner selling to them, has to give a note. Now, let's say that they were going to sell the business for $100 million. They could say the employees, some senior debt, some retained earnings from the business might make 50 million of that, and you'll get that up front. And then they say, I'll take a note for the next 50 million, and that's paid over a 10, 15-year period. And that's very common in today's world. And one of the things in one of the new firms that I'm working on is that we're saying it's really interesting. A lot of owners don't want to sell their businesses to employees because they have to take these notes. So maybe we should try to make more liquidity for those notes. And as many of you in the room that follow markets, private credit is definitely in vogue. So why not go buy those notes from these existing owners, and we can actually sell those to the big insurance companies, et cetera. The owners can get exits, and they'll actually probably tell more of their friends when they're selling things that, yes, this is a great exit. I got my tax-free. I now have my own liquidity, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think if we do that, and one of the things Liquidus, which is what a firm, and for those who are interested in it, I can talk to you about that later. I'm not here to promote our own venture funds or our own private equity funds, but it's one of the things that we have found that maybe we can make a bit of a difference. I should also say that because I was helped put together Unitas with a bunch of much smarter people than I, the one thing we learned is that you need to demonstrate first that you can make something work and keep it open source, and then hope that 100 people, 1,000 organizations start to follow you. And by that, you can make real change. But to ever think that you can do everything by yourself, particularly in a change like the middle market, my only hope is that people will follow us, that will make it easier to go forward. And then the other thing is you actually help the employees get liquidity. Now, this is once again a negative aspect of employee ownership. The employee on assets can look very wealthy, not very wealthy, but they could have a retirement of $200,000 or $300,000 in a private company. And as we all know, shares in a private company are great. Unfortunately, you can't sell them if you want to buy a house, because there's probably not a market for that. So considering ways, and once again, I'm looking for solutions to the middle class, more people that can figure out in your financial strategies on how to get employees more liquid. Can you loan against those shares? Can you create a secondary market for those shares, et cetera? There's a lot of smart people, and I'm not necessarily the smart ones, trying to figure out how to do that to make this more attractive. And once again, it's a legacy issue here. In the end of the day, a lot of people say to me that I've noticed is, why aren't these more popular? And candidly, I went out to look for a big bad wolf to say, there is some conspiracy in this world, because everybody loves a good conspiracy theory these days, and to say why people are against the middle class. And to be honest with you, I came up with the idea, and probably the basis, is that our capital markets are not set up to promote ESOPs, because if you're a buyout firm, if you're an investment bank, et cetera, they want to accumulate assets. And it's a very, many of me, I've met many people here that are asset managers, you want to put more money under management. By essentially selling them to the employees, you don't really increase your business. And if there's no incentives to it, and you have a sales force out selling to the businesses, to the owners, is that you're not going to go represent ESOPs, you're going to go represent, KKR. One of these times, and by the way, I'm not decrying KKR, because they've become, in my little effort of promoting ESOPs, I don't know if anybody watched like 60 Minutes about 6 months ago, but look up on 60 Minutes, KKR is promoting ESOPs. Now, and I've been probably approached by more people about that segment and said, no, I saw that on 60 Minutes, it's a really cool thing, but why could you compete against KKR? And I said, look, the great thing is they're telling you everything, but in KKR's case, when they do a buyout, they give 5% to the employees, and they keep 95%. Now, those 5% of employees do benefit, and particularly when KKR exits, they get some money. But I simply say to them, right idea, but instead of 5%, why don't we give 100% to the employees? Because that will probably make life better. So the good thing is we have some wind in our sails by some very big PR firms and in Congress to do that. And we basically kind of need, to be honest with you, and one of the things that I hope you'll consider in your own mind, we need an army of people to go out and convince owners that this is something to look at. They don't have to do it, but I'd like to see that they kick the tires. Because right now, most owners don't know it's an option to kick the tires, and very few financial advisors understand ESOPs. And there's a reason for that, is that if you looked at it technically and you're a person who likes to view every individual thing, you have to put a lot of things together. But I think as a whole is that, we'll basically find that there is some more solutions in this spaces. So that's basically really what I wanted to emphasize to you, is that the middle class, I think, can have one solution, and by the way, my hope is that you come up with 14 other solutions, because we have some brilliant minds here, about how to rejuvenate the middle class and how to incentivize it, because I really believe, and I'm not being over dramatic, but we're pretty much down the progression that the middle class is disappearing. And we only have probably another generation before you're going to really see that division. And maybe that's really what history wants. But in the end of the day, I think a lot of the values that the Brady Bunch and I Love Lucy and everybody else that was built upon is that solid middle class that has 2.5 kids. I always used to be confused as a kid at 2.5 kids. And that they basically have a house and a car, etc. So I appreciate you guys listening to me, and if there's things that you want to hear about more directly, we'll do that. But I don't know if we have time for questions or no. No time for questions. So just ask me afterwards, and we'll go from there.